Say they need more time to get up and running, hire staff, and get renters and at-risk landlords the funding that they need. They need to speed it up. This committee is considering Chairwoman Waters' Protecting Renters from Evictions Act of 2021 to answer the President's call, keep people in their homes, and to stop the unnecessary spread of COVID as the Delta variant bears down, particularly on unvaccinated communities. This bill simply extends the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's eviction moratorium until December 31st. It's a clean extension, so it's my hope we can move quickly to get this bill through the House so the Senate can also act quickly. We need to get this bill to the President's desk, and every hour is of the essence. So with that, at this early hour, I'm happy to turn to our ranking member for any uplifting comments that he would like to make.
I'll try to be very inspirational this morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. We're here today on short notice on an emergency measure concerning the eviction moratorium. As members of the committee know, a nationwide eviction moratorium has been in place since last September. It's since been extended multiple times and expires tomorrow. Unfortunately, even though the Biden administration has been well aware of the calendar, it is not until yesterday that the President requested Congress to act. None of this should have been a surprise to the majority. Indeed, Republicans have been sounding the alarm on this topic since mid-May. On May 18th, Mr. McHenry, the ranking member of the Financial Services Committee, sent Treasury Secretary Yellen a letter asking for data on how much emergency rental assistance funds had reached renters and landlords. In June, ranking member McHenry asked for an audit of the emergency rental assistance programs, and during a hearing on the housing issues, called out the Biden administration for their gross mismanagement of these programs. On June 16th, Republicans on the Financial Services Committee introduced H.R. 3913, the Renter Protection Act, to fix the Biden administration's mismanagement of the ERA programs, get the money out the door quickly, and keep Americans in their homes. Meanwhile, on June 29th, the Supreme Court issued its decision on the CDC's rental eviction moratorium, ruling that the CDC could not extend the moratorium past July 31st. On the 13th of July, ranking member McHenry sent a letter to Chairwoman Maxine Waters asking Treasury Secretary Yellen to testify on ERA programs. Secretary Yellen did not do so then, and indeed she has never testified on this topic. I bring up this history to point out the obvious. The administration and the majority knew very well that the end of the eviction moratorium was coming. The Supreme Court said so. The Republicans, particularly ranking member McHenry, were pushing for action, yet to date, Democrats have done nothing. Republicans have proposed a bill that would have fixed the issues with the emergency rental assistance programs to keep renters in their homes, yet the majority has refused to act. And now, because of their refusal to act, we are suddenly being dragged into the Rules Committee. The majority has only themselves to blame for allowing this crisis to fester. I would remind members of this committee that Congress has already acted to provide assistance to renters affected by the pandemic. Indeed, when the majority passed the $1.9 trillion COVID reconciliation bill earlier this year, it included over $21 billion in emergency rental assistance. That is on top of $25 billion included in the bipartisan COVID relief package from last December. Just last week, the Treasury Department reported that just $3 billion of this had been distributed to landlords and tenants. This issue could and should have been resolved weeks ago, Mr. Chairman. Certainly, ranking member McHenry's bill would have provided real solutions for Americans, and certainly the funds to address this problem have already been appropriated. But instead, the Biden administration and the majority have done nothing. And now we're being asked to take an emergency action to kick the can down the road yet again. We need to do better than this, Mr. Chairman. There are real substantive actions the House can take today, but instead the majority prefers not to. That's a real tragedy, both for the institution and for the American people. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Wasn't quite as uplifting as I had hoped, but I want to welcome everybody here and our witnesses to testify on H.R. 4791, the Protecting Renters from Evictions Act of 2021. I'm happy to welcome Chairman Pallone, Ranking Member McMorris Rogers, Chairwoman Waters, and Ranking Member McHenry. We're all delighted that you are here. I now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Chairman Pallone.
Thank you, Chairman McGovern. And Ranking Member Cole, you are always uplifting because you have a smile. That's the reason. But I am here to discuss the Protecting Renters and Eviction Act of 2021. It's critical that this bill proceed under an emergency rule because it's unfortunately crystal clear that the coronavirus pandemic is not over. While the economy has recovered for some, the Delta variant poses an ongoing public health threat. And as chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, I've joined with Financial Services Committee Chairwoman Waters to introduce this legislation to ensure that this resurgence of the virus is not coupled with a wave of evictions. Our bill would extend the moratorium on evictions until the end of this year. The need for Congress to take this action urgently is compelling. Census data show nearly 15% of renters owe back rent, totaling over $23 billion, with the average household owing about $3,800. When it came to implementing this emergency relief, the Biden administration had to spend valuable time fixing the harmful and confusing policy guidance instituted just days before Donald Trump left office. While these funds were quickly distributed to local communities, it understandably took some time to get these programs up and running because no federal housing safety net exists. I was happy to see that the Treasury Department's latest data, released earlier this week, showed that more rental assistance has been getting out the door, with more relief provided in June than in all prior months combined, helping nearly 300,000 families. In the meantime, though, it's essential that we extend the eviction moratorium to allow communities more time to distribute relief and to ensure the emergence of the Delta variant doesn't lead or exacerbate, I should say, housing instability, increased homelessness, and more people dying from the virus. The eviction moratorium has proven effective. Research shows that state, local, and federal eviction moratoriums have not only reduced eviction filings, but also the rate of COVID-19 transmission and fatalities. Meanwhile, other studies have shown that expired eviction moratoriums and increased evictions led to an additional 433,700 cases of COVID-19 and 10,700 associated deaths due to the increased risk of infection when people are evicted and forced in many cases, to move in, as the Chairman McGovern said, doubling up with other households or forced into homelessness. I'm really here to emphasize, if I can, because of my committee, how important this is in terms of the virus. I know that people think of this, or some may think of this, not you, as strictly an issue of renters or landlords or banks. But the bottom line is, and this is what we have to stress, that when people are evicted, the consequences are more of them get sick. And right now with the Delta variant, we really can't allow that. So I'm pleading to you in part based on the fact that people shouldn't be evicted and shouldn't be homeless, but more important because of our committee's jurisdiction, the impact on the virus and the spread of the virus, which, as all of you know, continues to be a huge problem. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. McMorris Rogers. Welcome.
There we go. Thank you. I oppose this rushed and unnecessary bill you're considering today. Last year, at the height of the pandemic, and for the purpose of reducing the spread of COVID-19, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention issued a nationwide moratorium on evictions. In the past 18 months, this moratorium has been extended several times by CDC. However, in May this year, the DC District Court ruled that the CDC had exceeded its authority by imposing the moratorium in June. The Supreme Court ruled that the current moratorium, which expires tomorrow, could not be extended absent clear and specific authorization by Congress on the CDC's authority. I oppose this rushed partisan legislation for several reasons. First, the bill before us does not provide clear and specific clarification on CDC's authority. It simply extends the CDC's moratorium based on an authority the courts have ruled does not exist. The reason this bill simply extends the unlawful order is because it was written last night, at the last minute, despite the White House and congressional Democrats' full knowledge for over a month that this moratorium would lapse absent congressional action. If this was truly a necessity, we should have been holding hearings and markups to clarify CDC's authority. I also have grave concerns about continuing to empower the CDC to shut down entire industries and attempt to control the everyday lives of Americans. The CDC and the Biden administration's attempt to mandate masks and vaccines using secret, unpublished, and questionable data is unacceptable, and we should not double down on this agency's failings by further empowering them to command and control. Finally, the moratorium is completely unnecessary. Unlike last year when it was first imposed, we have a widely available vaccine, and deaths and hospitalizations have plummeted nationwide. Congress has also enacted to provide almost $50 billion in emergency rental aid through various COVID relief packages, but only $3 billion has been spent. Instead of pushing through this last-minute power grab, I would urge my Democrat colleagues to focus on holding the Biden administration accountable, as Republican leader McHenry has been attempting to do for months, and ensure that the money gets to the people who need it. I, unfortunately, urge rejection of this misguided bill, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Chairwoman Maxine Waters.
I would like to thank Chairman Pallone for his support. We have been working together to try and assist the renters of this country, many of whom found themselves in extreme difficulty because of the virus, and jobs were lost, people were laid off, and people had to have some help and some protection, and the government stepped up to the plate to do that. To understand why this legislation is urgently needed, it's important to understand how we got here and what past experience with this coronavirus pandemic tells us what we should do, what we should expect going forward. Let's recall that in 2020, while Republicans held the White House and the majority of the Senate, they did not come to the table to work with us on legislation to help renters until December of last year, 9 months after the start of the pandemic. Although Congress and the current administration, under Democratic leadership, succeeded in securing a total of $46.6 billion to help struggling families remain housed, states and localities are having to build emergency rental assistance program from the ground up in the middle of this national emergency because our nation lacked a permanent housing safety net. States and localities were not helped in these efforts by the Trump administration's last-minute decision to issue rather confusing and harmful programmatic guidance, which the Biden administration had to spend valuable time on undoing. I spoke with Secretary Yellen just this week, and I know that she and her team are working closely with the governors and grantees to streamline the process for renters and landlords to access this crucial resource. In fact, the flow of assistance accelerated substantially in June with nearly 300,000 households helped. Mr. Chairman and members, let me just say to you that no matter that the governors were not able to implement this program as quickly as we would like to have them do, this is all brand new to them. And different governors are handling it in different ways. Some have been successful and have done a good job, but many have not done. And so we find ourselves at a point in time where people will be evicted. They will have their furnishings set on the sidewalk. When we're talking about children getting back in school, they won't be able to do that if they don't have a place to live. People are put in the position of not knowing where to find a house, where to find a home, what to do with the children. And so we can complain all we want to, we can blame each other for it, but the fact of the matter is we have an emergency in this country. And the emergency is, are we going to sit back and say, let the evictions take place? It's too bad that they didn't work fast enough. It's too bad that the governors didn't get it done. It's too bad that the Democrats didn't come to the table earlier. It's too bad that the President of the United States didn't basically ignore the Supreme Court, and he should have moved. We can make all of those excuses, but the fact of the matter is, children and families are going to be on the street. Have you ever seen furnishings of families put on the sidewalk when the sheriffs put them out of their home? That is going to be going on all over the country, and not just in so-called poor areas. It's going to be in everybody's district one way or the other. And so, yes, I have the bill. It's a clean bill. It simply says extend the moratorium until the end of December. Now, I know that there's a strong lobbying effort, and the realtors have come, and they have put a strong letter out last night, and some people are simply saying, oh my God, I don't want to cross the realtors. They're in my committee. I work with them. Some people are saying the small landlords have been put at a great disadvantage. I know that, and I spoke about the small landlords as we were trying to put all of this together. And so, yes, they are complaining, but I certainly intend, with the amount of money that we constructed, that not only are the renters taken care of, but these small landlords are going to get every penny that they're owed. And it's enough money in here to do that. Now, having said all of that, I have a choice to make. We all have a choice to make. The small landlords, many of whom need the money to pay the mortgage, or this is their retirement income. I get that. But when I have to balance who is harmed the most and whether or not these families and these children are going to be put out on the sidewalks, this is what I have figured out. Yes, the small landlords are at a disadvantage, but guess what? They know how to go to the bank. They know how to get a loan. They know how to negotiate a loan moratorium. They know how to deal with hard times. And if we can get this program extended so that they have an opportunity to do what they need to do in order to get their mortgage paid, in order to get the loan modifications, that is, I believe that they can hang on until it flows smoothly. And I do not believe that the families, many of whom have 3 and 4 children, have that opportunity. They can't get a loan. They can't negotiate a moratorium on a rental. It is the landlords who have to do that. And so I recognize the disadvantage to everything and everybody. But my heart tells me that we will not be able to defend our inability to keep these children from being put in school, to keep these families from being on the sidewalk, to keep them from losing all of their furnishing because they have no place to put them. And so I'm here with an emergency. It is an emergency. It's an emergency for all of us. And I think there are times when the Congress of the United States have to rise to the occasion. This is one of those times. And I don't think it's too much to ask of us. I don't think any of us relish seeing what could happen to these families if we do not extend this eviction moratorium. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. McHenry. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We shouldn't be here today. This is the culmination of a failed committee process. We've known about this in the committee for 6 months. We've known about it since the Supreme Court ruled 5 weeks ago that it would take legislation for us to extend the eviction moratorium. And it's interesting to me that Democrats are now advocating for the Trump administration's policy that they raised as dubious, legally dubious, and the Supreme Court confirmed it was legally dubious. But the majority had no plan. we've been fighting about this in committee because I'm advocating for action as early as April of this year. This was a known and preventable disaster. We should not be dealing with a bill that the press release said was filed at 10:39 p.m. last night. This was a known and preventable disaster, and to call it an emergency now is absolutely patently absurd. And while my colleagues on the other side of the aisle were just, I don't know, willfully hoping that something else would happen, the administration bungled the rollout of the emergency rental assistance that we provided in both December in a bipartisan way, and that Democrats legislated additional monies in February. The Biden administration changed guidance 4 times: February, March, May, and June. So to punt it to the last administration is just not correct with the timeline. So we supported this money going out to pair assistance to renters and the eviction moratorium. We legislated that last year. We knew the expiration was coming since December of last year. So I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a story from National Public Radio that highlights some of the widespread problems with the administration's rules and what people are experiencing trying to get assistance with back rent.
Without objection.
Thank you. And so what have committee Republicans been doing this whole time? Well, on May 18th, as Ranking Member Cole outlined, I sent a letter to Secretary Yellen asking for data on how much of the rental assistance money has reached renters and landlords. Haven't heard a word since. So on June 16th, Financial Service Republicans introduced the Renter Protection Act. It fixes the Biden administration's mismanagement of the renter assistance program. Simple. We should be considering that bill. 2 weeks later, the Supreme Court ruled on the eviction moratorium. Justice Kavanaugh stated that while the CDC exceeded its statutory authority, he agreed to leave the moratorium in place till expiration, which is tomorrow. Now, did my Democrat colleagues disregard this warning sign by the Supreme Court? We had a deadline to get funds out or take congressional action, and Democrats did neither. Furthermore, this bill extends what is the Supreme Court has already ruled as unconstitutional, an unconstitutional order giving the CDC this power. A few weeks ago, Housing Secretary Fudge appeared before the Financial Services Committee, and the committee hearing was entitled Build Back Better, More Equitable Housing Infrastructure for America. Was it about this? No. Was it about the Supreme Court ruling? No. It wasn't on the eviction moratorium, no. It wasn't on the administration's plan to actually fix this program, the ineptitude and mismanagement of delivering those funds. It wasn't on anything remotely related to the things that we've known for months. So I sent Chairwoman Waters a letter asking that Secretary Yellen, because both Secretary Fudge and Secretary Yellen have implementation powers over this important rental assistance program, I asked that Secretary Yellen join the hearing, and all my committee Republicans joined in that request. Did she show up? No. So I posed the questions to the HUD Secretary, Secretary Fudge, hoping, well, that we'd hear some sort of clarity. Not a gotcha. I sent a letter ahead of time. I have questions. Let's figure out how we get this money in renters' hands. We know the eviction moratorium's ending. We know the Supreme Court. We know all this stuff. Let's do something. Nope. So here's what Secretary Fudge said when I asked how many renters have been helped by the monies that we voted for in a bipartisan way in December and the monies that Democrats added to top off the program. I asked, how many folks have been helped? Her answer was, I don't know. Now, this wasn't a gotcha question. I telegraphed it ahead of time. I've asked about it in every hearing we've had for the last 4 months in committee. This was a known disaster, not a gotcha by the Biden administration sending a press release out, not the Biden administration sending a press release out, not sending a bill up to Congress, not the bill that was filed at 10:39 p.m. last night about a preventable disaster. So my level of outrage here is sincere because I've been trying to work on this so we don't have to bring it to the Rules Committee on the last day of session, that we don't have to beg the majority to stick around for an additional day. I don't care about our schedule. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people that are going to be harmed by the inaction and the ineptitude of this legislative process and the ineptitude of delivering these funds to people that are in need. That's why I'm outraged. It's the same concern we all have for our constituents. So when does this end? What's the plan? 5 more months? Why 5 more months? Do we have any idea? No, we don't. Bill filed. It was discussed as 2 months when Chairwoman Waters raised it with me at about 23 hours ago. After a 2-day markup, we have this conversation. So I'm sorry we have to bring this to the Rules Committee. It should have been resolved in the Financial Services Committee. We should have a better committee process. We shouldn't have to bring this to you as an emergency issue. I have a great deal of language. I'm willing to work with the majority on this, as I've expressed over and over again. So is this 5-month extension something that becomes permanent? Are we going to see any different in the administration on how to get the money out? When is the end of the COVID emergency? So the full-scale failure by the Biden administration that Republicans have been trying to address for months is clear. From letters to bills, we have been asking for the majority to join us in finding a solution. And now here we are. It just doesn't cut it. So let's support the Republican bill. Let's get the money out the door to help renters so that we don't have to have this fight at the 11th hour. We can fix this. We should fix this. We should not be dealing with it 24 hours before, less than 24 hours before the expiration. Happy to answer questions. Yield back.
Thank you very much. Let me just say a couple of things for the record. Moratoriums have led to 1.5 million fewer evictions in 2020 as compared to 2019. And let me remind my colleagues that while a vaccine is available, as Ms. McMorris-Rodgers has pointed out, the people most likely to be facing eviction right now are unvaccinated. They're not getting it, even though I wish they would. And I appreciate the gentleman's outrage. I wish there was more outrage against those who are out on our in the media and some of our colleagues in this House who are going around raising questions about people getting vaccinations. I mean, we're not out of this pandemic yet, and a lot of it is because of the misinformation that is being embraced and that is being promoted out there, and we need to stop it. And as is pointed out, Congress provided more than $46 billion to support emergency rental assistance programs. The Treasury Department has gotten this money out the door. The problem lays with the governors who need to move more quickly to get this money out the door. So yeah, I mean, look, I wish the pandemic was over. I wish we were all, I think we're back to business as usual, but we're not. And when we see members of Congress parade outside the front of the Capitol bragging about not wearing masks, and as we see this Delta variant spread throughout the country, now we're being told it may spread as easily as chickenpox. I mean, come on. So I get it, I think everybody's made their position clear. I think it's important that we move forward. I yield to the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McMorris-Rodgers, as you noted, the federal eviction ban has been in place since March 27th of 2020. Now this initially was a more narrowly directed congressional ban, but under the Trump administration, the CDC, and we were in challenging times, so I certainly understand it, issued a sweeping nationwide moratorium that's due to expire Saturday. Given the unprecedented use of authority by the CDC, clearly unprecedented given the Supreme Court ruling, have there been any hearings in the Energy and Commerce Committee on CDC's imposition of an eviction ban?
Unfortunately not. The first time that we were made aware of this legislation was yesterday. I think things have changed dramatically from where we were when this moratorium was first put into place. We have a vaccine. The death rates and the hospitalization rates have plummeted. And as you noted, Mr. Cole, this particular moratorium was ruled by the courts, and they ruled that the CDC did not have the authority. So we are moving forward on extending a moratorium without actually doing our jobs as members of Congress to address what the court highlighted and to make sure that we have the specific enforcement mechanisms and a program in place that's actually going to meet the need. So I think that this is rushed. This is not the way to legislate, and the majority has not done its job to actually do the hearings so that we could move forward on a legislation that would be appropriate for this time.
Has the Energy and Commerce Committee held any markup on legislation that would provide CDC with, quote, clear and specific authority, unquote, as Justice Kavanaugh recommended in the Supreme Court concurring opinion last month?
No, the Energy and Commerce Committee has not held any hearings on this.
And has the Energy and Commerce Committee looked in any official capacity into the circumstances which initially necessitated the moratorium and determined whether this authority should be provided or more narrowly tailored?
Unfortunately, the Energy and Commerce Committee has not.
And in fact, was there even a discussion in the Energy and Commerce Committee prior to President Biden's statement about how he would like Congress to extend the order?
Unfortunately not. My understanding was that the majority decided to move forward without Energy and Commerce
Okay,
taking
so
any action.
we're the first people as a committee really addressing this rather than the committees of authorization.
That's true.
It's unusual. Mr. McHenry, you've been very vocal about this issue for months. Why is it that the Democrats and this administration are blaming the Supreme Court and are just now calling for Congress to fix the problem when we saw, particularly you saw, this issue coming well before the Supreme Court ruling?
Well, first, I would add that the Financial Services Committee that has oversight over housing policy has had no hearings about the eviction moratorium this year. I believe the reason why we're here today is because of the $46 billion Congress allocated, about half of that was bipartisan in December, about the other half was through the Democrats' bill they passed in February. I believe the reason why we're here today is because the administration has done such a poor job of getting rental assistance out, they'd rather not have the debate. We have, of the $46 billion, according to the latest report, less than 7% is actually gotten in the hands of renters. 7%. And so I believe they don't want to have this discussion because it's a grave embarrassment of implementation by Treasury and HUD.
You anticipated my next question, which was, is it fair to say the administration would be squarely to blame if any American family loses their home due to the gross mismanagement of the emergency rental assistance programs?
Yes.
And I just want to go through the timeline of this again and show that it could have been avoided. On May 18th, 2021, you sent a letter to the Treasury Secretary Yellen asking for data on how much ERA money had reached renters and landlords. Did you ever hear anything back? You gotten a reply?
No.
On July 13th, 2021, you sent a letter to Chairman Waters demanding Secretary Yellen testify alongside HUD Secretary Fudge to answer for the mismanagement of the ERA programs and calling for the committee to consider the Republican Renter Protection Act the next markup. Did you receive any answer?
No.
And on June 15th, 2021, a day before introducing your bill, you sent a letter to the GAO asking them to audit the ERA programs. You hear from them?
Not yet.
Okay. I think it's pretty clear where the responsibility for what we're dealing with resides. Thank you both.
And I appreciate the gentleman's comments, but I have to say, I do feel it's a little ironic to hear my Republican friends complain about the lack of hearings. They regularly skipped the committee process and came to this committee on a regular basis with bills that never got a hearing or a markup when they were in charge. We're here today because this is urgent. The moratorium ends in a matter of hours. If there was ever a time to move quickly, I think it is right now, and so I want to yield now to Mrs. Torres. No question. Mr. Rushenthaler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I'd like to associate my remarks with the ranking member, Tom Cole, and also the ranking member, Patrick McHenry, and McMorris Rogers. I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from numerous groups, including the realtors and mortgage bankers that are opposed to this.
Without objection.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask ranking member McHenry if there's anything else you'd like to add.
I wish we had dealt with this in the committee in April, May, June, or even last week. I wish we'd had it on the markup calendar to actually have a bipartisan bill that we could have taken across the floor on suspension and dealt with this problem. I offered legislation, committee Republicans offered legislation in anticipation that the Supreme Court might rule that the order was unconstitutional. We would have to have a plan. I wish the majority had a plan. I wish the Biden administration had more actively distributed the funds that Congress allocated. I think the majority is probably happier if my microphone's off. But I wish we'd not have to be here this morning, because we've known about this for months. And to Chairman McGovern's point about bringing bills to the floor, I think it is a grave failure of the legislative process when either majority has to come to the Rules Committee without having done a modicum, just the least taste of work in committee. It is offensive to this august body, the Rules Committee. It is not the proper way for us to legislate. I agree with the chairman completely on that. I just wish we had at least some work product to show you on a bipartisan basis, so we would not be here on Friday morning in an emergency meeting about something that we've known about for months. So thank you.
Thanks, ranking member McMorris Rogers. Is there anything additional you would like to add?
Well, I thank the gentleman, and I would just emphasize that this. Oh, thank you. I'd like to emphasize that this was a national eviction moratorium that was put in place by CDC. So it was basically under the national public health emergency that CDC issued this eviction moratorium at a time when we were at a very different place with the pandemic. The Supreme Court ruled that they did not have the authority to do what they did. Now, CDC is under Energy and Commerce. We've not had any hearings regarding this eviction moratorium, whether or not it's been effective. Ranking member McHenry points out that only 7% of the funds have actually gone to those in need. And then also the Committee of Jurisdiction on Housing has not had any of those hearings. So I would just emphasize again that CDC has exceeded its authority. And as lawmakers, as legislators, we have a responsibility to be doing our jobs to make sure that when an agency has exceeded its authority, that we respond and that we would absolutely pass the clear and specific authorization that the Supreme Court said Congress needed to act on.
Thank you. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Perlmutter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I just, sitting on financial services, I do understand the ranking member's statements. He has raised these issues at various hearings, and the chairwoman has railed against the states that have so poorly distributed this money. Colorado, we've done a pretty good job getting money out to the landlords, to keep the system going. But there are states all across the country who've done a very poor job at this. And I appreciate the ranking member McHenry's, ire that why are we here at this late date? I wish we weren't here at this late date, but we are. We have a big matter ahead of us. We have a lot of evictions that are sort of right on the cusp, but we have a lot of money that could bring these tenancies current. And that's the point. The point is to have a little more time as we get this money out the door to bring these tenants current with these landlords. I think that's what we've intended all along. We still are in a pandemic. There is no question about it. A lot of folks are being infected with the Delta variant, and we just have to address it. I appreciate some of the comments that have been made, but we are where we are. We got to deal with this. I appreciate the woman's matter, and if she has anything she'd like to add,
Thank you very much, if I may, Mr. McGovern. Thank you, Mr. Perlmutter. I would like to just say that, yes, Mr. McHenry talked about the fact that perhaps we could have done more. Of course, in our committee where we have the responsibility for housing, we did all of the work to respond to the needs of the people based on COVID-19 who lost their jobs, who were fired from their jobs, the businesses closed down, parents not able to work, trying to take care of their children. We did the work. We worked with all of the housing advocates and the groups. We did the work to determine how much was needed to take care of the landlords and, of course, the residents and the families. Now, let me just say this. Yes, I did talk with Mr. McHenry whatever hours ago that he identified. But at that time, he was concerned about the arrears of the big companies with the multi units. Of course, I'm concerned about everybody who's owed. But I want you to know, from the beginning, I talked about the small landlords. And when I met with Yellen, I talked about the small landlords. A number of things have been done. As a matter of fact, some of the forms that are used have been modified and been changed in order to make them more usable and that the average family can get these forms done. I have helped to organize legal aid and everybody else to give assistance to those people who needed some help with their forms. Yellen has been working with governors, Republican and Democrat. Now, this was new to them, and they had to go to their legislatures, and they had to work out who was going to be in charge of the programs in their states. All of this work certainly has taken some time, but what we have now is an emergency. We can dislike what has not happened. We can dislike that it did not happen fast enough, but the fact of the matter is it's an emergency. And when an emergency occurs, you have to determine what are you going to do with it. Is it an emergency enough that you're going to stop families from being put on the sidewalk? Is it emergency enough that you're going to need to wonder what the hell is going to happen with these children that won't be able to go back to school because they don't even know where they're going to be sleeping or they're going to be. It's an emergency. And so, yes, we should move forward and we should do everything that we can. The money is there. This is not about appropriating more money. The money is in the hands of the states. It's in the governor's hands. And Democrat and Republican, we can work with them. I've even gone so far as to talk with Secretary Yellen and say, use your influence, call a Zoom with all of the governors, ask them, what's the problem? What more can I do to help you? Are there any obstacles that I can remove? And so, while all of this is going on, and it's not easy, it's new, but the fact of the matter is the idea of helping our families when this crisis has occurred, and look, it's going to get worse. More families, because you know what the business is saying, if you watch what was happening in the news, and with a lot of the high-tech families, they say get vaccinated or you can't work here anymore. I mean, this is a crisis that we're in. And so after all of the accusations, after all of the condemnations, we have an emergency. And I'm thinking about the children. I'm thinking about those who say, we got to get our children back in school. And I'm thinking about all of the school districts that have worked plans for safety as much as they possibly can. And those people who say that we've got to get the children back in school, you tell me how we're going to do it when they don't have a bed to sleep in, when they don't have a home to stay in. Tell me how we're going to do it. Are some children just going to be left without having the ability to be educated? I don't think so. I think we're better people than this. And no matter what we don't like, I think we've got to work together. I work together with Mr. McHenry on a lot of stuff, and he knows that. And so I'm
We
not.
probably both shouldn't share that publicly, right?
Well, that's okay. They know. They know now. They know now. I'm not so obstinate in all of this stuff that we work together on a lot of things, and it's time for us now to work together the best we possibly can. Let's get this moratorium extended, and let's go to work. And I tell you what, he made some representations about trying to get Secretary Yellen in at the same time that Secretary Fudge was there. Well, I want to tell you, it was her very first meeting with our committee. And so it was not a comfort zone for her to be there, trying to deal with both of them at the same time with the kinds of issues that they had to deal with that was not only about rental assistance, but some of the other issues. Now, having said that, I will go back to Secretary Yellen, and I will get her back into the committee as soon as we get back into session so that she can talk about everything that they have done. I will work with you on that. Thank you.
Let me reclaim.
I yield back.
Thank you. Let me reclaim my time and just say, we've got a problem. We've got to deal with this problem. And, you know, however I can assist the chair and the ranking member in making this situation better going forward, I do that, and I yield back to Mr. McGovern.
Thank you. Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member McHenry, would you be interested in me yielding you a few minutes to respond?
A lot was said. If it's about the discomfort of a cabinet secretary when something is this important, I think that's absurd. I certainly understand when one of our colleagues goes to the cabinet, you want them to have a nice first meeting before the committee. I understand that. It was an awful meeting because every committee Republican raised this question we're dealing with today. Why have you not paid, why have you not gotten this money out the door to renters? And I got the best answer, which was, I don't know. And it got worse from there. It could have been a nice hearing. I think we should be happy for our colleagues that go to the cabinet. As opposed to the Senate. We should never be happy if they go to the Senate. But when they go to the cabinet, there's no problem that I have with Secretary Fudge. The one problem I have is that both Treasury and HUD have oversight of this program. It's a housing program. It's a housing program. And it's to team up with an eviction moratorium where you say, I know you're suffering tough times, and we're going to say to your landlord, don't evict. And at the same time, we're going to pair money up so that person who is on hard times, when that moratorium eventually ends, that they're not kicked out. But the example I have is from Atlanta, Georgia, and this is an NPR story. $13,000 of back rent. And because of the rules, because of the changing rules from this administration, and because of the changing rules of the agency that's distributing the funds, because that's how the administration decided it was going to be distributed, she's able to get 60% of her back rent. So when the eviction moratorium ends, whether it's tomorrow or 5 months from now, she is going to be in the same financial situation. Now, because of the rules of this administration, her landlord did get some money out of it, but not enough to make her whole, not enough to keep her in that unit, which means she and her kids are no better off. So she has an unpayable debt, whether it's this big or this big. It's unpayable to her. So she's no better off. We should demand from this administration better rules. We should demand from this administration the change that we have in the Republican bill the Financial Services Committee Republicans filed June 16th. And we're 5 weeks after the Supreme Court ruling. So to say this is an emergency, it was an emergency 5 weeks ago. We just had no committee process. We had no dealing with it, even though we had requests from Republicans so that we could do something proactive. I'm sorry,
That's-
Dr. Burgess.
I would like to point out to the ranking member that Texas has no state income tax. We are funded by property taxes primarily and state sales tax. So we're not suspending the tax bill for the property owners. And that is going to create more and more difficulty. So we need to be mindful of that as well.
And Dr. Burgess, to that point, half of the rental units in America are owned by what we call mom and pops, just a family that may have one rental unit or two. I'm worried about them and their ability to pay their mortgage just as well as I'm worried about the renter they have that's facing hard times. And we're going to create a foreclosure crisis on those people that have maybe just a unit. And maybe that is their whole net worth. I'll give you an example. Mr. McGovern, This Old House, wonderful program that's been on NPR it's been on public TV for a long time. I was watching, they had a neighborhood in Boston, and this woman tells the story. Because of legal codicils, when she tried to purchase, she was not allowed to buy in certain neighborhoods. We fixed those problems. But she was able to buy in this neighborhood, and it was 3 units. She lived in one, and she rented out the other 2. Her whole net worth is in that. Her whole net worth. And the story of This Old House, the reason why the story strikes me is because she had a fire, and this was her whole life savings as she's about to retire is caught up in that building. And so I think of her. I think of people that I know that are struggling because they have their savings. They have their savings caught up in one property, and this is something very sacred to that family. And I worry about them, just as I worry about those renters who are on hard times that we're trying to get back into the workforce. And we have unfilled jobs. We have a great deal of trepidation about the virus. I concur. And so, there's a lot of sincere concern that we have here, but we have a failure of the legislative process that we have to bring these concerns to you at this 11th hour.
Thank you. And Ranking Member Morris-Rogers and Chairman Pallone, you addressed it. We have a failure at the CDC, and as painful as it is for me to say that, I have a lot of respect for the men and women who work at the CDC. I've been down to Atlanta several times. I took a trip to the World Health Organization during the bird flu. I recognize that if it wasn't for the detailees from the CDC, the World Health Organization would be more useless than it is. But the CDC has not done its work. And we need to be extremely concerned about that during the time of a pandemic. And Ranking Member's right. We haven't had the type of hearing with the CDC that really should have been long ago necessary. We got word the other day that on the House floor, we're going to wear masks because of the Delta variant, largely arising in India and neighboring countries, but it's here now, and it's a problem. Nobody knows exactly how much of a problem it is. House physician says, mask up on the House floor. We ask him for data. Well, I can't really get you that. So I called the CDC, finally got a telephone call from the CDC. It took me 10 days to get a call from the CDC. And I learned yesterday that what the House physician told us is correct. They don't have the data. Hope maybe this afternoon there'll be something printed in the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Review that CDC puts out every week, but it's not sure if they have enough to put out. Questions came up during our meeting. Is this a virus? Is this variant persisting in people who've had the mRNA vaccines manufactured in this country? Or was it in people who were getting Sputnik or Sinovac or some other product that we know is not as effective? He couldn't answer that question. And it's an important question, it needs to be answered. Now, here's the deal that really makes me very nervous. I asked him if the Delta variant was a problem in northern Mexico. And he said, yeah, it's a big problem. So we got a lot of people that are moving from northern Mexico into Texas with just a brief stop at a Customs Border Patrol station, maybe enough to get tested, maybe enough to have a positive test, but that's the end of it. And then they go on their way, and we're not doing anything about that. And I asked the CDC yesterday, what are you going to reinstitute Title 42 restrictions as President Trump did so we can secure that problem? And they said that's for DHS to decide. We can only provide guidance. But the day before, the House physician said guidance meant we all mask up on the House floor. Guidance seemed like a pretty rigid assertion of their authority. And yet, when it comes to this problem that is affecting probably more states than Texas, but we are being affected significantly by this, what are we doing to protect our people? Same people that Chairman Waters is concerned about. We're also concerned, how are we going to keep them well if we continue to allow their neighborhoods to receive this amount of disease burden when we're not controlling it or understanding it? And it's a serious problem, and that's on us in our committee. We need to have the agency in. We need to get answers to those questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging me. I'll yield back.
No, thank you. Let me just repeat what I said at the beginning. What we do know is that vaccines work. And we do know that the people who are being hospitalized now, who are dying from this disease, are mostly unvaccinated people, overwhelmingly, like 99%. And I never really ever say anything nice about Mitch McConnell, but I will say I give him credit for taking out ads in Kentucky, trying to persuade his constituents to get vaccinated. And that's, I think, all of us, to the extent that we can use our voices and marginalize those who are spreading this kind of anti-vax message, or that somehow it doesn't, or getting these crazy debates. I mean, that's how we stop this. And for the life of me, I don't know why it has become so difficult or so politicized.
Will the gentleman yield for a
Yes,
moment?
I'm happy to yield.
I don't know. With no thought for my personal safety, I watched Morning Joe this morning. And same criticism that you're giving was discussed. But this affects our committee. He said, I don't understand why Mark Zuckerberg is not in front of a congressional committee every day because of the misinformation that is being sent out on his medium in foreign languages. Now, you want to blame Republicans, you want to blame evangelicals at the country club for this? It is on our social media networks big time. And again, that's on us. We should be taking that initiative to end that type of behavior. Thank you for yielding. I'll yield back.
I'm not going to disagree with you about Mark Zuckerberg. And I actually praised Republicans like Mitch McConnell for doing what they're doing. I'm simply saying that there are some people, including in this chamber, who are spreading the wrong message, and it's dangerous and it is deadly. And so, we would maybe not be having this discussion if we were all united in terms of getting vaccinated earlier on, but we are where we are. So we have to do what we need to do to protect vulnerable people. And as I said, and I think it has been said by people who have testified here today, that the majority of people that would fall and who would be evicted most likely would be people who were not vaccinated. And so, in any event, who's next? Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as I understand it, we are here because the Supreme Court said that the CDC eviction moratorium, which started September 4th, 2020, will expire today or tomorrow unless Congress acts. And we know that that eviction moratorium has been effective because people have not been forced out of their homes in the middle of a pandemic. So I just have a couple points here. First off, the need to extend the eviction moratorium. We've got the Delta variant now. On September 4th, when the Trump administration instituted the CDC eviction moratorium, we had 42,000 people a day getting tested positive for COVID. Now, we're over double that. It's 92,000 a day, and we're going up. In the last month, the national outlook has worsened. Actually, since the Supreme Court decision, the national outlook has worsened, and there's been a 4 times increase in the number of people getting COVID. So we do have a continuing emergency where evictions are going to negatively impact the spread of the variant and the mortality of the people who are evicted. The second part is that although Congress has acted very forcefully in a bipartisan manner to put money out there to keep people from getting evicted by providing funding which will go to their landlords, only $3 billion of the $45 billion has reached the people that Congress intended. This is because it's a state by state and sometimes a locality system. In Pennsylvania, we've had some huge frustrations. Money from the CARES Act that was supposed to go to prevent evictions was not spent by our legislature. They ended up spending it on the correctional system. That is not the type of housing we were trying to support. They still are having trouble pushing the money out across the state. Now, there is some good news, and I would urge our local governments and advocates to look at what's been done in Philadelphia. There is an eviction avoidance system. Before a landlord can apply to evict someone, they have to go into this system that helps both the landlord and the tenant access the funds that have been made available. It is preventing evictions. It's doing what Congress intended, which is to provide money to help those landlords, particularly the small landlords, the moms and pops for whom this is their retirement. So please look at the systems that work. I would urge those who are advocating that we not extend the moratorium to spend some of that advocacy on your local governments, your local court systems, your state legislators, to make sure that they are pushing out the money that Congress has put out there for this very purpose, to protect both the renters and the landlords. There was a reference earlier to some regulations that the Trump administration put out on its way out the door that impeded distribution and the effectiveness of the money that Congress has put out there to defer evictions. And I know that one of those regulations prevented the use of that money for legal aid in court systems to try to prevent evictions, despite the fact that there was clear congressional intent. I spoke on the floor about the fact that some of this money could be used for legal aid. So I know that's one area that was problematic. Representative Waters, can you tell us any of the other areas that impeded in those regulations, which then had to be rescinded, how that impeded getting the eviction relief out the door?
I was having a little bit of trouble hearing you, but I started to talk about what we were doing as we began to learn about the kinds of problems that were being had in all of the states. One of the things we did with the administration was to talk about all of the complaints about the complication of the process and the forms. And so they moved to help modify the forms. Now, I do believe that there was a bit too much flexibility that was allowed for the states to try and deal with it in ways that they thought perhaps it should be dealt with, when it should have been more standardized. And they did modify some forms in working with the states. The other things that we have done is tell, exactly as you're saying to us, to legislators, get to your governors, because when the governors get this money, we put the money out there. The money is there in the states. And then they have the responsibility for getting it to the cities and the counties that work your governors, work the county, work the city, work everybody, because the complaints come from different levels. In my hometown of LA County, the complaints are coming from the county government and from the city government. So we need to make sure that we help them to all get on the same track in how they disperse this money. The other thing I would like, and I've talked to ministers in my community about using, we still have communities that are not, fully equipped with computers. We still have grandmothers who are heads of households who don't use computers. And I'm talking about how we can provide more assistance. And when I talk with legal aid, I know that they were already doing it, even though what we have to do, they have to get kind of permission by which to do it. And I think I even wrote a letter saying that this was a legitimate thing that needed to be done. And so all of these things have to be done. It's new and it's a lot of money. And we're saying expedite it. In the state of California, they sent it through the legislature, and it came back that they would supply 80%. And we said, oh, no, you won't. They went back through the legislature and came back, okay, 100%. So all these kinds of things are going on, and we all have to work hard to ensure that it can be expedited and implemented in ways that will do exactly what we intended to do.
It is sort of a classic federalism problem, isn't it? You know, that we're providing the money, but we're relying upon the states, and you don't want to be too prescriptive, but we've got to make sure that the money gets there. So we need the states to step up and provide systems that people can actually access, whether they're landlords or tenants. But at this point in time, we need a little bit more time, so this bill would address it. Thank you, and I yield
You're
back.
so very welcome.
Thank you very much. Ms. Fishbach.
Ranking Member McHenry, you know, we've been hearing a lot about all of the concerns and issues that happened with the program, and that we're extending the moratorium just so we can deal with those. And I'm concerned that we should be dealing with them in this legislation. As we look at extending a moratorium, we should take it on as Congress. It is our responsibility to address those issues and straighten this out, given that we've had almost a year to address these. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. I know that you said you've been trying to work on it, but you know, there's some of the specific issues that we're supposed to reach out to our governors and things like that, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the act the Republicans introduced, because I'm assuming it did address some of those issues.
Well, we had bipartisan language in December. We had language on eviction moratorium going back to the CARES Act. And the CARES Act paired the eviction moratorium with monies to help those people affected stay in their rental units. And so we revived that language in December. We attempted to revive that language in December and pair it with monies. Now, in February, the Democrat-only bill that they legislated on CARES included language about these monies and additional monies for rental assistance. But they changed the time frame for distribution. This emergency, where the legislative language, the CDC order was to expire at the end of this month. They knew that in February. Democrats had the opportunity to change that. They didn't. And they did change something about the monies, though. They didn't change the eviction moratorium, but they changed the money time frame. So the $46 billion, the states have until 2025 to spend the monies that are supposed to be paired with this eviction moratorium. Mm-hmm. That was the Democrats' legislative priority, to extend the time frame that states could spend the money. The Biden administration changed the rules 4 times since the beginning of the year. We've had no legislative hearing about this. The reason why it's been mentioned in our Financial Services Committee is because every single Republican in the hearing with Secretary Fudge of Housing and Urban Development, every single Republican raised the rental assistance challenge and the eviction moratorium. So, you know, we've heard the priority, we've heard the emergency, but this is not an emergency. On this day, it's a tragedy that it's this level of incompetence that we didn't take action in February, March, April, May, June, even July. Even the markup, we had a 2-day markup in the Financial Services Committee. I've had a bill in the offing with every single Republican on it. Not nary a mention of it. What we do is return to the language that we agreed to in a bipartisan way in December on prioritizing those people that have back rents. If you prioritize people that have back rents, you can try to make them whole so that when the eviction moratorium eventually ends, and I would hope that it eventually ends. I think we all should hope it eventually ends. We don't want to be in an emergency forever. We're very concerned about the health of our nation. But when it eventually ends, if you haven't paid your back rent, you're out. You're in the same straits you were in before, just a different time frame. And now you're more deeply in debt because you haven't prioritized arrears. So that's what the legislative language does. That's what we agreed to in December. It's bipartisan. It was then. I wish it would be now. So thank you, Ms. Fishbach, for allowing me to address that.
Thank you very much. And I am very concerned that we are spending $46 billion of taxpayer dollars, and we're not taking it very seriously. And we are rushing House Democrats are rushing things through without addressing the issues, without really taking it seriously and just spending this money. And so I appreciate the work that both Ranking Member McHenry and Congresswoman McMorris have done on this, and I just hope that we would actually address the issues and get this money out to where it's needed, because I am concerned too. I want to make sure that not only the renters are able to stay in their homes, but that the landlords are made whole too, because there are plenty of mom and pop. And we need the larger rental companies to stay in business too, otherwise they're in those houses or those homes. So very concerned, though, that we need to take this $46 billion in spending seriously and actually address the issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Morelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know what? To paraphrase Shakespeare, discretion being the better part of valor, I think I'm just going to yield back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. DeSagne.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to point out that there has been a hearing on the effect of evictions, particularly evictions that may or may not have a legal basis. And we had that hearing in the Judiciary Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Constitutional Law. And I will say, I want to associate myself with all the comments about the health effects and the financial effects on our people, on our small landlords, and of course on people who would find themselves homeless. But I also want to let people know our court system cannot immediately deal with all of these evictions starting next Monday. And our court system already has problems dealing with evictions. We have got to put a pause on this for the sake of public health, for the sake of people's economic well-being, and to give people time to make this transition. I too wish that we had planned for this more in advance, but I can say that people are making some progress. We need to help people right now. And then I also, to my friend from North Carolina, I think we should give some praise to our state, because if you want these statistics on the money going out, you can go to the state website today. They update it weekly. We have helped, 110,702 rent and utility awards as of the middle of July. 68,586 households helped, but there's a wait list in Wake County, my home county, so we need to do more. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Does everybody have any other questions? Seeing none, thank you all very much for being here early this morning. Appreciate it. You're free to go.
Let me just say that I don't know what time the Rules Committee ordinarily convenes and it starts its work, but, you know, being here at 8 a.m. this morning, I want to tell you I have a real appreciation for that, and I thank you for it. I really do appreciate your presence here. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
Preferably not.
So at this time, without objection, the committee stands in recess subject to the call of the chair.